My name is Valerie Kraut. I'm the Chief Program Officer with Associated Ministries, and I'll be your host this evening. And then I also want to highlight Sandy. I know she has her camera off right now. Sandy Windley, she's my co-host. So thanks, Sandy, my partner in crime over there. And also, like I said, we got a really tight agenda. So we'll maybe have some time for some questions, but you could put them in the chat box and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure to put the contact information in for the speakers so you could always connect with them after the meeting. But as I mentioned, we do have an awesome lineup of speakers. We're going to hear from Klarissa Monteros. She's the Senior Policy Analyst for the City of Tacoma. And it's kind of weird introducing her because she's one of the Associated Ministries members of our family too. She worked there for years, but so she's one of ours. And then Colin DeForrest, who I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen forever. So good gonna hear from him. He's with Innovative Impact Strategies, and he'll be talking about some new safe parking network. Oh, and let me back up a little bit. Klarissa is going to be talking about race and homelessness. And I just want to say that this is going to be a series of conversations that we're going to have during the community quarterly meetings. So just stay tuned for some more conversations happening, because I know it's going to be a lot of information that's presented tonight, and we'll spend some more time later in conversation, kind of unpacking all of that. And then we're going to hear from TieganTidball. I'm not sure if she's logged on yet. She's the management analysis too for the City of Tacoma. She's going to be on to really help us better understand what resources and support the City of Tacoma offers in terms of for agencies, individuals, congregations, to help equip them with resources to be able to assist individuals experiencing homelessness. And then we're going to hear from Mike Yoder, the Executive Director for Associated Ministries. He's headed up our advocacy work group for a few years now. And he's going to give us an update on some advocacy work that we can do with policy. So like I said, we got an exciting agenda. I'm going to try to keep us moving and stay on time. And we're here until 6 p.m. And before we get started, we'll start with a blessing from Mike Yoder. And then I'm going to read our mission vision statement, and I'll put it in the chat as I read it. And I just want to remind everyone that the mission, vision, and purpose of this meeting was created by the attendees of the community quarterly meeting. This is your meeting. So I just want to remind everybody of that. And then there's some people that may not be aware of that, but I'll read that after we hear the blessing, and that will really ground us to get started in our time together tonight. So Mike, do you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you. Just really grateful to see everybody here tonight. And I just wanted to offer some opening words to center our time together, something that would be appropriate for multiple faiths, and those of you who are just people of goodwill who are showing up with us here tonight. We're so thrilled that you're here. So let me just offer these words. We are gathering today as a caring community, all of us in the continuous quest to live lives that benefit our fellow human beings. Some of us prompted by our undying faith in God, others in our lifelong commitment to perfecting ourselves and the world, but all of us committed to fostering greater cooperation between all. We desire to contribute to peace and justice among all beings. So bless our meeting and our efforts as we seek a path to the common good. Grant us insight, wisdom, and understanding. Create among us fellowship and harmony, so that our love for our neighbors is reflected throughout our community. Amen.
Man, thank you for that, Mike. That was a wonderful blessing. So I am going.
Valerie, you're muted.
I am so sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. So we're going to get started. I'm going to read our mission vision statement. And it is posted in the chat if you'd like to follow. The mission of the community quarterly meetings is to love and serve the needs of neighbors experiencing homelessness. Our vision is for communities of faith and social goodwill are educated and actively apply their essential abilities to help address and prevent homelessness in Pierce County through engagement in social service agencies and other innovative programs. The purpose, Associated Ministries convenes these meetings in partnership with other homeless and housing service providers working in Pierce County with the goal of creating an energizing space to gather regularly to learn about, discuss, and take action on the crisis of homelessness in our community. What we will achieve, we will bring like-minded people together, inform and educate attendees about homelessness in our community, seek understanding of effective interventions, discuss potential projects and solutions to positively impact homelessness. So thank you for listening and being patient, but we're ready to start our program. Miss Klarissa, you're on.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. I'm going to share my screen with you all. You're gonna give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Yep, cool. Okay, so my name is Klarissa. I'm founder CEO of Klarissa Monteros, LLC. And before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to Mike for grounding us. In your words, you just stated, you know, we're here committed to peace and justice, a path towards common good, where the love for our neighbors is reflected in our community. And I think all of that transfers over into what we're going to be presenting to you guys today. And I'll make sure I tie it in throughout the presentation. So I wanted to begin by giving you guys just a high level context description of homelessness. And here's a visual you guys could look at. This visual comes from the Center for Social Innovation. They did a nationwide study. So before we go into what this looks like in Tacoma, I want to just show you guys that this happens everywhere. This isn't just in Tacoma. This happens in every city, across every state, across the nation. And so it's important that we don't personalize this, right? Because I'm going to be sharing a lot of statistics with you guys that are hard to see and hear and take in. But I'm sharing it with you guys so that we can learn how data could show us where inequities are. And that's not so that we can live in those inequities and say, oh, shame and guilt and, oh, what are we doing? But it's so that we could know where they are so that we could pay attention and do things different and implement equitable alternatives. And so right now, I just want to show you guys this graph. And this graph is basically a myth buster for me, because when Center for Social Innovation, they did a nationwide study on homelessness. Specifically, it was the first one specifically done on homelessness for Black, Indigenous people of color. And what they found is that poverty does not predict homelessness, right? So a lot of people think, oh, well, we have homelessness because we have poverty, because people are poor. And what this study showed is that that's not the case. If that was the same people experiencing poverty, this percentage in deep poverty, we would see a line go across into who's experiencing homelessness, but we don't see that. What we see is a negative correlation, which means that there's people of color entering homelessness that aren't in poverty, right? And so that leads us to say, what are the other causes of Black, Indigenous people of color experiencing homelessness if it's not poverty? And we'll go into a little more of what that means. So I want to break down what racial inequity is. And racial inequity is when race can predict experience or outcome within a system, okay? That's when you could say, if you are Black, you are 5 times more likely to be a victim of police force than if you are white. That is a racial inequity, right? That is a prediction based on the color of one's skin is going to predict an outcome in that system. Racial equity is when race no longer predicts outcomes within a system. Now, I want to bring this up to you because we're going to be talking about a lot of racial inequities. because right now in every single system in the United States that makes our economy thrive, in every single system is embedded intentional structural racism. And what I want to highlight before we go any further is I'm not going to be talking about like individual acts of bigotry. So we're not talking about racism on an individual level. We're talking about systemic structural racism that's built into systems. And so I wanted to preface that. And now this inequity, we find it in every single system you guys could think of, in government, in police, criminal justice, in housing, in banking, education, healthcare, social services, you name it, it's there. And I'm only highlighting this so that you guys see that I'm not picking on homelessness in particular. That's what we're going to pay attention to. That's what we're going to talk about. That's what we're going to learn about. But this happens everywhere. And the cool thing about you guys being willing to learn about this and talk about this is that you guys are spearheading this work because, you know, for hundreds of years in this country, nobody has really addressed this. And that's why we see homelessness and the disproportionality in homelessness that we see today. All right, so here's some stats of some inequities currently in Tacoma. Now, this came from a report I got from City, from City Data that came from the police department a couple weeks ago. So this is brand new. In the city of Tacoma, Black residents, they represent 11% of Tacoma. This is where I'm showing you inequities, how we can learn how to look at data to see what's going on. Black folks represent 11% of Tacoma. If all things are equitable, all things being equal, they should represent 11% of the force encounters through Tacoma PD. That's not the case, right? They experience it at 38%. So when you see 11%, if I was to chart this, which I wanted to, I didn't have time, it would be 11% right here, 38% like this. Now that's an inequity. That's a disproportionality and inequity that we could say race is predicting somebody's experience in that field. And we wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for the data, right? Because we have stories all day and we know this is happening. I mean, I don't need a data point to tell me this happens, but for a lot of folks, when we're trying to do race equity work, we have to prove it's happening first, right? And this is a way we can do that. And I'll teach you guys how to do it in almost any system. So let's look at the Black use of force. And then for Native Americans, 1.6% of the population, 2.7% of force. That seems small, but when you talk about statistical significance, it's significant. Now, when we compare that to the experience of white folks, and this is what we see across the board in every system, in every single system, when you break down data by race, white folks always fare better. Their experience is better. Their outcomes are better. This tells us that every system is designed for white men to succeed, and that's just the way our nation is designed, right? And what we could do through data is see what that's showing up like in our statistics. For TPD, 65% of our population is white, but only 48% of force encounters are for white folks. Again, all things being equal, it will be 65%. If we look at COVID, here in Tacoma, locally, we know that Native and Pacific Islanders are contracting COVID at way extreme disproportionate rates. So is Black, American Indian, and Hispanic. Right, so again, this is disproportionalities. These lines, they represent statistical significance. And I'm gonna say that a bunch, because you know, it was so hard for me to get, but if I could learn how to do statistical significance, anybody can. And it really just takes a little bit of math when you disaggregate by race. But in order for you to publish these findings as a disparity, it has to show significance, okay? And why is this important? It's important to analyze data with the racial equity lens because it could break down what isn't working around equity. And in the same note, it could build up what is working, right? We got to do a landscape analysis, and I'm going to be very fast because I feel like I'm already going over time. we want to do a landscape analysis of the data initially because we need to know where we're starting. If we want to do race equity work, there is no way we're going to know if it's impactful if we don't know where we're starting. And I preach this everywhere I go, so you guys aren't the only ones, right? Because everyone's trying to do race equity work. But if we don't have common metrics in the beginning of what diversity is, what inclusion is, what is a disproportionality, then we could be spinning our wheels doing all this work, right? But if we have a landscape analysis and we know what's going on in the beginning and where the inequities are, we know where to target our interventions, right? And we know where to track it. We know where we could take risks, and we know where we could track the outcomes of those risks. And if it's working, we do more of it. And if it's not, we stop, right? But we don't know that unless we could figure out how to look at that through the data. It could change the way we make decisions, and at the end of the day, it could really lead towards transformation. So I talked about how racism predicts outcomes in a couple other systems, and I want to talk about how it predicts outcomes in homelessness as well. So race not only predicts experience with homelessness, but outcomes. So what I'm going to do is talk about the high level, why people are experiencing homelessness at disproportionate rates, and then I'm going to talk about what that looks like inside the homeless system. Valerie, what time is my stop time so I know?
You have 10 minutes.
10 minutes, got it. I'm gonna go fast, guys. So in terms of race predicting experience for homelessness, when we're talking about homelessness, we have to talk about network impoverishment and policy. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm not gonna go too much into this, but this came from the first chart that I showed you guys, where it wasn't that if you were poor, it would predict homelessness. If your networks were impoverished and you're a person of color, it would predict your experience with homelessness. And that is very important because when we look at network impoverishment, that's saying that it's not just me that doesn't have any means, it's that everybody in my system doesn't have any means to help me, right? So we know that for white folks in general, they are helped by their parents. Youth are helped by their parents until their early 30s. That doesn't happen in Black, Indigenous people of color. That doesn't happen with our homeless youth. Their networks are impoverished. They don't have that support. And so it could take a flat tire going to work and them missing a paycheck for them to end up on the streets, right? It takes far less. What we learned was that for white folks, their life has to go completely haywire. They have to develop mental health issues and drug addictions and burn their bridges with their family and all these things until they become homeless. And you know what? Our homeless system prioritizes that. They say this is the face of homelessness, but that's the face of homelessness for white America. The face of homelessness for Black, Indigenous people of color looks a lot different. They become homeless for a lot less, for far less. And so when they're going through the system to be prioritized, we're not prioritizing their experience, right? So not only are people of color overrepresented in homelessness, but when they get to the homeless system, we're saying, oh, we're gonna prioritize what white homelessness looks like, and the housing ends up going to them. So we see an overrepresentation of BIPOC folks in homelessness and an underrepresentation in them actually getting into housing. We'll talk more about what that looks like. I briefly wanted to touch on policy implications because when we talk about network impoverishment, sometimes people think that it's the act of like laziness, like people are just not working, and that's not the case. Research has found that Black, Indigenous people of color who are experiencing homelessness are actually overemployed. They're just underpaid. They work more, they just get paid less. There's lack of economic opportunity for them in those communities. So we're not talking about laziness. We're talking about systemic policy that has impoverished network over hundreds of years, dating back to the Dawes Act of 1887. That's when they surveyed our land, and that's important because the same survey they used of America for the Dawes Act is the same survey they used to redline later on in the later 1900s. So in 1887, they took America and they lined it all up, and they said, okay, so here in Washington, if we have some tribes from Yakima, and then you had maybe Samish, and then you had Cowlitz, if you were Cowlitz, they might send you to Yakima, right? Because they took everyone's land. They took the natives' land and they relocated them. They switched them around, and they broke their networks, okay? So if you know Tacoma, you know how to navigate Tacoma, and they get you and they put you in Spokane. How successful are you going to be in Spokane, even if you have the means? It's a whole new environment without your systems that you just got ripped away from. There's a pattern of this in policy in American government. Indian boarding schools, Indian child welfare is another example of how they tore Native American families apart. So when you see overrepresentation in homelessness today, that's not by chance, right? They were intentionally torn apart. The feds would give Washington State a per capita dollar amount per Indian child they could put in child welfare through the Child Welfare Act. That's a law in writing, okay? Redlining, they then use the maps for the Dawes Act, they used it for redlining. I don't know if you guys know what redlining is, but in Tacoma, I work for the city and we teach this and we acknowledge it and we own it. In Tacoma, it happened. Just like it happened everywhere else. And what they did is they redlined areas that had high concentrations of people of color, and they labeled them as non-desirable, right? And areas that were concentrated with white folks were labeled as desirable. In Tacoma, that looked like the North End, right? It looked like Fircrest, and we still see the detriments and the impacts in our community today. If you drive through the East Side and the South End, and then you drive through the North End, you can see it. Now, the kids that were born in the East Side, that were born in the Hilltop, that were born in the South End, were born into redline communities with, and the city will say this, when they said something was undesirable, that meant we weren't putting resources there. Okay, now I can tell you across the board, that means that we weren't putting money into schools. We weren't putting money into the water pipes underneath the homes. We weren't putting money into sidewalks. We weren't putting money into anything. There's actually been redline district of business owners that they couldn't even own business in certain areas that we're still trying to undo in the East Side. We're still trying to undo zoning laws, right? Still to this day. So these legal implications, we're still tugging with policy and still seeing that implication today. Mass incarceration, right? Criminal, we don't even got to go into that too much, but you guys already know there's an overrepresentation. What I like to say is, we see it in foster care too. And the way I like to say it is like, foster care is to Black women what prison is to Black men. And I truly believe that's by design. I think by design, our law, and I don't even think I could show you guys, if I had more time, I could show you guys evidence of this in policy. And we could talk about this for hours, but we also, when we talk about disproportionalities, breaking down outcomes by race, when you look at jails, when you look at who's in the foster care system, when you look at who they exit from the foster care system, when you look at who dies in foster care, it's disproportionately Black and Native. Okay, when we look at ICE, and these are all things that rip families apart. If your dad's in prison and you're in foster care, you got taken away from your mom, your likelihood of being successful in life is going to be a lot harder. If you're a child and you don't have a home that's solid, it's going to be harder for you to navigate through life. ICE rips apart Hispanic and Latinx families. Hurricane Katrina, and this will be my last example, but Hurricane Katrina, I was at Associated Ministries when they were sending people from Hurricane Katrina to Tacoma for us to help. Okay, that's recent. That's a policy change. That's not how we responded to all the hurricanes that happened. The way we responded to Hurricane Katrina was rip them away from their community and send them across the United States if they want some help, and we can help them. But that's the same. Once you start to see this, you start to see it. Racism manifests in policy. That's the same thing they did with boarding schools, the same thing they did with Dawes Act, the same thing they did in foster care, right? You could start to see that this concept of network impoverishment is ingrained in policy. And so I just want to explain that so we understand why we see a disproportionality in homelessness, right? This isn't individual acts of laziness, this is systemic. And then once they get into the homeless system, their race does predict outcome. This is the homeless system across the nation, not just in Tacoma. This happens everywhere. It's usually diverse. I won't get into the technicalities. I'll let you guys see it. For white folks, a lot of times they're streamlined through the system like this. For people of color, they go through the system. I'm not picking on Tacoma. This happens in Pierce County, but it also happens in every other county in Washington and across the nation. We did studies with C4 and Center for Social Innovation where we looked at prioritization and what people's experience are. And I know that in Pierce County in particular, if you're Black or African American, you're going through you're going through coordinated entry more than 3 times before you get a housing referral. Whereas a white, I got 5 minutes, that was texting me. Whereas a white folk, if you're a white folk, your tendency is that you get right through. All right, so I'm showing you that this is what we learned from data. Before we had coordinated entry, we didn't know this. We just had like hypothetical or our own experience, our own stories from our own experience. When we looked at data across the nation, we found that, no, yes, coordinated entry works. Yeah, it works in terms that it's giving resources to people who didn't get it before, but it's time for like a 2.0, right? Where we can make it work for Black, Indigenous, people of color as well, because it was built blind. And so I only have 5 minutes, so I just want to briefly touch on like a racial equity framework and how you guys could do this. I showed this in a few different systems, but you guys could do this everywhere. You guys could do this for folks coming to your churches asking for assistance. You guys could do it for, I seen somebody from Bates. You guys could do it for educational outcomes. For people in homelessness, you guys could look at this for length of time people are homeless, length of time it takes for them to get into housing, the amount of rental assistance they get, recidivism rate. You could look at this across the board and disaggregate by race. And what you want to do first is do a landscape analysis, like I said, to get an idea of where are the inequities at. And then you want to analyze contextual factors and develop equitable alternatives. I know I'm talking super fast. I apologize, guys. I packed too much into this. So to get a landscape analysis, this is the quantitative, this is the number side. This is where you go through with your data people and you find out if there's statistical significance and disproportionalities. So once you find that 11% of the population is this and 11% of your outcomes is this, you want to go through and figure out where those disproportionalities are, then you want to go through and do math and see which ones are significant. And the ones that are significant, you keep and you hold on to, right? And think surveys, dashboards, comparing data, things like this, your census data. Once you know where those disproportionalities are, that's when you start to ask the question, well, how do Black, Indigenous, people of color benefit from this? And how are they being burdened by this? How are they being harmed? That's when you start talking with lived experts and having focus groups and interview panels with folks saying, hey, this is what we found. This is the data we found. What can you tell us about this? What is your experience with this? How has this been for you? Has it been hurtful for you? Or has it been a good experience for you? But what's important about this part is that we don't analyze our own context, right? Because we have bias. So when we look at, go ahead, John.
Yeah, we have to wrap it up in about 1 minute. Sorry.
Got it.
Sorry.
I'm done. So then after we figure that out, we could figure out our equitable alternatives, right? We find strategies that minimize harm. We take risks and track our progress. Here's an example of a toolkit from the Race and Social Justice Initiative. If you Google toolkits, you can find all kinds of different ones. I just really like this one. This is really easy to do if you guys wanted to implement. And again, I just wanted to say, I know I shared a lot of inequities with you guys, but equity is when race no longer predicts outcomes, and we can get there, and we will all work together to get there until we do. But in order to get there, we got to know where we are in the beginning, right? We got to know where the inequities are. Yeah, and so my bibliography for if you guys want to know where we got that stuff from, and my contact information if you want to reach out.
Yeah, that was so much rich information, Klarissa. I mean, you are, yeah, I applaud you in so many ways. And I just want to say that I did mention we're going to continue the conversations going forward, because for us to address homelessness as a community, we have to look at race and homelessness. We have to better understand, like Klarissa was saying, where we are and how this is actually in every institution, because that people have to, in living, people interact with different institutions. So all of that impacts homelessness. So I know this is a really tough conversation or tough information for a lot of people to hear. I want to acknowledge that there could be some discomfort. I'm encouraging you to sit with the discomfort and to just keep showing up and have us unpack it together. But just please lean into it, lean into that discomfort if there is any, and please just continue to show up, because we have to, as a community, start talking about race and homelessness if we really want to impact homelessness in our community. So I applaud you, Klarissa, one of my favorite people in the world, but I'm going to keep us going because we got 3 more people, but I know you might have to go on. She's interviewing 80 police officers. So we thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to present this very valuable information, and we'll definitely have you back. So I'm going to move us on to our next presenter, who is Colin, and he is with Innovative Impact Strategies, and he will have a few minutes to, and again, he's going to be given a just overview of some information. And I know it's hard because there isn't as much time for questions and dialogue that we love about the community quarterly meetings, but please connect with Collins afterwards if you have further questions that we don't get to today. So Colin, it's on you.
All right. Well, hey, Valerie, thank you. One, this is just so fun to come back, and it's like a homecoming anytime I get to do anything, which I've been doing a lot in Pierce County. I used to be the homeless services manager for the city for many years. But this is really fun. It's great to hear Klarissa talk. That was super powerful. So thank you for letting me follow Klarissa, because that was awesome. I'm not even going to try to put up a PowerPoint because hers was great. So really what I'm here to talk to you about really kind of goes along with that. It's something that is extremely simple, but somehow is something that to 6 months ago is something that in the homeless services world in Pierce County, we did not have, right? So right now, one of the projects that I'm working on in partnership with Metropolitan Development Council that is funded by Greater Tacoma Community Foundation is a safe parking network. So I have some people that I see, some faces on here that are involved with the safe parking network, which is awesome. And hopefully after this meeting, I'll have people reaching out to me that are wanting to be involved with the safe parking network, which would be great also. So I really wish that I could shine this program on to be something that's amazing and super complex and takes so many integral pieces to get going. But really, what the Safe Parking Network is it's an identified gap in our current homeless services system. It's a gap that has been there for years. Pretty much, I've been doing this work for too long. And it's something that in my time in Pierce County and my time in other counties, there's very few places that actually have places for people, this sub-demographic of homelessness that is truly, we often think of homelessness as being invisible. And I think for many years, for me, I'm 42 old. When I grew up, homelessness was invisible. And that's kind of how, that was the unspoken rule was, as long as I kind of don't see you, I'm not going to deal with you and you can do your thing, right? Well, thank goodness that has changed over the years. And now we're actually, as we talk about some uncomfortableness from what Klarissa was talking about, homelessness in general is uncomfortable, right? And there's a lot, it's also extremely emotional, and it pulls visceral feelings, right? So for many years, homelessness was just something that was invisible. Luckily, that's changed, right? But with that being said, there's a subset of homelessness, people living in their vehicles. That is truly still a piece of homelessness that is invisible to this day, right? Oftentimes, what that looks like to me, when someone approached me about doing this, just said, "Hey, what do you think about trying to start a safe parking network, a program for people living in their vehicles in Pierce County?" I had no interest in it. I was like, I hate the idea of people living in their vehicles, and I don't think it's that big of a thing, right? Well, as I did some more research on it and talked to some people that actually had some knowledge on it, I was awoken to find out that, wow, this actually is really a thing. And some of the subsets that this really is a thing for are some of the most vulnerable in our community, along with some of the individuals that honestly can be diverted out of homelessness quickly, right? So just to explain a couple of those subsets, who they are, it's oftentimes, it could be a domestic violence situation. It's a mom who's fleeing a bad situation of control and just bad stuff. And really what she can do is she can leave when she has the time, and what she can do is she can grab her kids, grab whatever they can grab, and they got that car. That's like what they have, right? So now they're living out of that vehicle. And anybody who's done any homeless services work, everybody who's on for the most part on this call knows, just the same as moms or dads that have kids that are homeless, there's always that ultimate fear of, if they find out I'm homeless, they're going to take my kids, right? Well, that's especially the sense when you're living in your vehicle, right? So what that does is it creates a situation for now, these parents are putting their kids into situations that are extremely unsafe, right? I'm going to go to the darkest dead end street, and that's where I'm going to park, and that's where I'm going to sleep with my kid, right? So when I started learning that that was a part of this, I was just like, wow, okay, this is a thing, and we need to figure something out for it, right? So I could talk for way too long. I'm going to just try to really cut through it. But so basically what we did was we said, hey, let's incentivize people, especially with COVID, let's incentivize people that have, I mean, all we need truly is a parking lot for these cars to simply park overnight, right? So who's a great partner for this? Well, you know, one of the things that bubbled up was faith-based organizations. Faith-based organizations right now, unfortunately, are not be able to have, they can't have a lot of service. Faith-based organizations also have huge parking lots, right? So boom, okay, how can we pair this? So and faith-based organizations also, very fitting for this meeting, want to serve, especially many of our most vulnerable, right? So what we did was we came up with this program. Basically, the goal of the Safe Parking Network is to incentivize faith-based, it doesn't have to be faith-based organizations. We have a project that we're hopefully finalizing within the next couple of weeks with Tacoma Community College to also house students that are homeless, which is a whole nother can of worms, which is unfortunate also. But the idea with this program is that we partner with faith-based organizations. The Safe Parking Network is truly a fiscal sponsor for the program. We're truly, if you think about it, we're an umbrella. So we come to Joe's church, right? And Joe's church says, hey, we want to be involved in this. We have a parking lot. What can we do? Well, a lot of it is really the choice of the church, right? So if they want to serve families living in their vehicles, some McKinney-Vento students. All right, how many do you want to do? We want to do 5 McKinney-Vento families in Tacoma. Great. So what we'll do is we'll say, hey, I come in, I have the subject matter expert stuff to help them basically figure out, okay, where's your parking lot? Okay, how can we set this up? Oh, we're gonna need 2 portable toilets. We're gonna need a hand washing station. We're gonna need some fencing for this area right here. So we'll figure out what those kind of like capital one-time costs are, and then those ongoing costs, and we'll pool those together. That's part of the site application, and that's all stuff that the Safe Parking Network covers. So at the end of the day, the goal of the Safe Parking Network is truly to fiscally incentivize these faith-based organizations to participate, so they don't have to worry about the $200, $300 a month that they got to pay for portable toilets. They don't got to worry about the garbage services. They don't got to worry about the fencing. Oftentimes some of our partners will do site host, which is someone that helps out. So I'll give them like a $500 stipend a month, which is cool. So then they're on site. But truly at the end of the day, and I've already talked too long, because truly what I really wanted to do was, and please follow up with me. I put my contact information in if you have any questions, but truly at the end of the day, all we're doing is trying to identify places in Pierce County, these families, where these individuals, where these senior citizens, where whoever can stabilize for as short of a time as possible, because the ultimate goal of this program is to get these people out of their vehicles as quickly as we possibly can and into some form of housing, ideally permanent housing, something that they can stabilize in, right? And it has been extremely successful to this point, because many of these families and individuals can divert, and we can keep them out of our system, like coordinated entry, like going through Associated Ministries, so that we can truly focus on the most vulnerable with our dollars. Whereas these people that maybe are working, it's a single guy, he's working and he's in his car. Well, let's see if we can stabilize him and get him out of the system with kind of diversion, or even just giving him a safe place to park for a couple of weeks. And now we can put that money towards someone else.
Nice.
That's it.
Yeah, that's awesome, Colin. And I know that because we've been meeting for several years now, and before COVID in person, and there's been a lot of congregations that have expressed interest in providing safe parking. And we had one speaker come in one time, but this is local. Colin, we know Colin from years back. He's always been in the field. He is like the expert here. This is a really cool opportunity that he's giving congregations or businesses